everyone. So today we're going to be talking about public service loan forgiveness. I'm going to start with a section about the basics of PSLF, and then we're going to move on to talk about some current events and updates.
And before we get started, just wanted to thank Tyler Press from Public Law Center in Orange County. She's the one who got this going. So thank you so much, Tyler.
Yeah, thank you, Robyn. Thank you, Milo, for being here and for agreeing to talk to all of us. I know that people are anxious and this is a really important topic. So go ahead, Milo.
So if folks have questions, go ahead and type them in the chat. We'll try to answer them as we go, but hopefully we'll have time at the very end as well to answer some questions.
Okay, so just generally, what is public service loan forgiveness? This is a program created by Congress and added to the Higher Education Act in 2007. It's a program to provide loan forgiveness for people working in qualifying employment, which means for a nonprofit or government. And generally, the rules are the remainder of the federal student loan balance will be discharged after 120 qualifying payments on qualifying loans and while working full-time in qualifying employment. So each of these terms, qualifying employment, qualifying loans, these are a little complex, so I'm going to go into a bit more detail. So a qualifying loan must be a direct loan. So all of the newer federal student loans are direct loans. But for people who borrowed a while ago, you may have another type of loan, maybe a FEL loan or a Perkin loan. So those would not be eligible for public service loan forgiveness. There is a way to make those eligible for public service loan forgiveness, which is to consolidate those loans. So by consolidating a Perkins or FEL loan, you essentially repay it by taking out a new direct consolidation loan. Those are then eligible for PSLF. The issue with consolidating right now is it's a little bit unclear and a little bit risky in terms of income-driven repayment. So some people may be pursuing income-driven repayment forgiveness as well, and may have a lot of repayment months accumulated on their underlying loans. But if you consolidated those loans at this point, it's rather unclear whether those credits would be preserved in any way. And it seems like they would not be based on recent court decisions. So consolidating would mean you would lose all of your IDR progress, but potentially it would mean gaining access to PSLF. So qualifying payments, you need 120 qualifying payments total. These don't need to be consecutive qualifying payments. And a qualifying payment, it needs to either be of a certain amount or it needs to be on a certain payment plan. So for non-consolidation loans, it's fairly simple. A payment on a non-consolidation loan is always qualifying if it's on an income-driven repayment plan, such as IBR, Pay, or ICR. We'll talk a bit more about these later. And then a payment is also qualifying if it's on the standard plan amount or if it's like above the standard payment plan amount over a period of 10 years. So that's the basic standard repayment formula you would get if you took out an ordinary direct non-consolidation loan. Sort of the issue with that is that you need 120 payments or 10 years in order to get PSLF forgiveness. And if you're making standard repayment payments for 10 years, you would have repaid the balance, more or less. There are some situations in which that wouldn't be true, but generally that would not lead to a large amount of loan forgiveness under PSLF. So for direct consolidation loans, it's a little bit more complicated. A payment on a direct consolidation loan is still going to be a qualifying payment if you're on IBR, Pay, or ICR, but payments on direct consolidation loans are not necessarily qualifying. For direct consolidation loans, standard repayment isn't always set to the 10-year to the 10-year period that it is for a non-consolidation loan. It depends on the loan balance. So if you had I believe if you had a direct consolidation loan with a balance of $60,000, it might be 25 or 30 years. I don't remember the exact number. And this means that the payments would not be of a higher amount than the 10-year standard plan amount, and therefore they would not count towards PSLF. So you could make payments for much longer than 10 years and still not have any qualifying payments if it was a direct consolidation loan. So there's also these other non-IDR repayment plans, graduated repayment, extended repayment. Graduated slowly increases over time. Extended is just a lower payment for a longer period of time. These also wouldn't be qualifying payments, so they're not IDR, and they're of a lesser amount than standard. So again, those would not provide any PSLF progress. And there's no requirement that you stay on the same payment plan for the whole time. You can combine multiple repayment plans. So, let's say you start repaying your direct loan, you're on standard for a year, then you decide to switch to IBR, do that for a year, then you switch to pay, do that for, like, all of those count, right? So all of those would be qualifying payments. And one other thing about qualifying payments, they don't need to be consecutive, or I guess this is more of a qualifying employment thing. They don't need to be consecutive, but you do need to be in qualifying employment at the time you apply. And also, aside from payments, there are forbearances and deferments that might count as qualifying payments. So the big one that will count for most people with recent loans is the COVID forbearance. That 3-year period of time will pretty much always count as long as you're in forbearance and not, if your loan is defaulted during that time, you might not have gotten the forbearance, but if you're in that forbearance, that 3-year period does count towards PSLF as a qualifying payment. You still need to meet the other requirements. And then there are other types of forbearances that may count towards PSLF. This can be a little bit more complicated, but generally, if you apply for an IDR plan and they can't process it right away, they will put you on a processing forbearance. This will last for up to 60 days. That period of time, up to 2 months, will count as qualifying payments. And then disaster forbearances will also count. And then the big category of forbearances that will not count is the safe plan forbearance. So as many of you may know, after the safe plan was blocked by a court decision, everybody on the safe plan was put in a general forbearance. And many people have been on that general forbearance for a long period of time. None of the time in that general forbearance counts.
So quickly, we have a good question. She asked if someone asked if you needed to have made payments during the forbearance, whether those would count. The answer is no. If your loan is in a forbearance, it means you're not making payments. And if you make payments, it's not going to be on a qualifying repayment plan. Your loans need to be designated in a qualifying repayment plan. We're going to get in a minute to how to switch out of forbearance, but just know that if your loans are officially in a forbearance, making payments won't help. It won't count towards PSLF.
Okay, and then another question in chat about getting off of forbearances.
Again, we're going to get to that. A lot of people are asking that question. Thanks, Milo. Okay. We're going to get to that very soon.
Yeah, so just going through the basics of PSLF right now. So yeah, safe plan forbearances do not count. So if you're looking to pursue PSLF, it's very important to know what type of loan you have and what status it's in. Is it in repayment? Is it in forbearance? Is it a FEL loan? Is it a direct loan? So all of this information will be available on studentaid.gov when you log in with your FSA ID. If you don't have this type of account yet, you can create one there. There will be information on the type of loans you have, the balances of those loans, the loan servicers, the payment plans. And then for your individual loan servicer, you can also create an account on their website, and there may be more information there. So if you have your loans on Mohila, you can go to Mohila's website, Advantage, Nelnet. Okay, so the last prong of PSLF is qualifying employment. So government employers and 501c3 nonprofit employers, working for them is qualifying employment. Government contractors typically do not qualify, and some other private nonprofits that aren't 501c3s can qualify if they're devoted to certain public service purposes. So qualifying employment must be full-time, which they define as 30 hours a week. And you can combine multiple qualifying employers to reach this 30 hours. So if you're working 20 hours a week for one nonprofit and 20 hours a week for another nonprofit, you can get employer certification forms for both of those employers, and that would be qualifying employment for PSLF. It must be paid. It can't be volunteer work. And as I said earlier, you have to be in qualifying employment when you apply. So even if you reach 120 months a while ago, if you're applying now, you need to be in qualifying employment. Okay, and so recent changes to PSLF. So on March 7th, 2025, there was an executive order, and it proposed changes to PSLF regulations to exclude organizations that engage in activities that have a substantial illegal purpose. They defined this in the executive order as follows: aiding federal immigration law violations, supporting terrorism or child abuse, engaging in illegal discrimination. It's important to note that this was a proposal to change PSLF regulations. This executive order had no immediate effect. It was signaling an intention to go through the typical process to change PSLF regulations. And additionally, it's unclear whether these changes could be made through regulatory change at all. Yeah, PSLF eligibility is defined by the Higher Education Act, and the definition of a nonprofit is defined by 501c3. So it's unlikely that the Department of Education could narrow this definition by executive order or by regulation.
Yeah, I just want to give people some comfort to know that the actual act itself defines that 501c3 and government employees are eligible. It doesn't provide any discretion to the department to narrow those categories. So we think, of course, the current administration is going to try to do this. They have already announced their intention to establish a rulemaking session, which is required, and negotiated rulemaking is required under Higher Education Act. So that's the beginning of the process. But again, we think that there are very strong arguments that the department has no power to narrow public service loan forgiveness categories of eligibility, and to do so would actually require a change in the law from Congress. So people really should feel some comfort knowing that this really looks to be very illegal. So, of course, we never know what a court will do, but we have pretty strong arguments on our side.
Okay, so as I was discussing earlier, it's important to be on an income-driven repayment plan if you're pursuing PSLF generally. So I'm going to pass it off to Robyn now to talk about the currently available income-driven repayment plans.
So as many of you have been asking, and I know many of you were on what was the previously most favorable income-driven repayment plan called the SAVE plan. Unfortunately, the SAVE plan was challenged in federal court, and that case is moving forward. And the federal court, including the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals, have enjoined the department from using the SAVE plan. As a result, everyone whose loans are on a SAVE plan should have put in a forbearance. And if that forbearance, although it doesn't carry interest, it doesn't count towards public service loan forgiveness. So that means while you're in this SAVE plan forbearance, you're not earning any time towards reaching the 10-year forgiveness requirement. So if you can go to the next slide. So in response to the Eighth Circuit ruling in February, the department stopped processing any IDR applications. So they refused to process IBR applications, pay, ICR, all the different types I'm going to explain in a minute besides SAVE. So if you applied, probably nothing happened. Now they are finally processing these applications for other types of IDR plans. They have a huge backlog because they stopped for several months. So if you put in an application a while ago or put it in now, it will probably take some time to process, so you know that. And your loan, while you're waiting, is supposed to be put in a processing forbearance for up to 60 days, during which that time, like we said before, should count also towards IDR forgiveness as an IDR plan payment. We highly recommend that if people can switch, they should do so. Because if you want to continue working towards PSLF, you need to get out of the SAVE forbearance and into a different IDR plan. In addition, the forgiveness provision under SAVE is, we think, highly likely to be struck down. So staying in a SAVE plan and hoping that eventually the SAVE plan will be reinstated and you will get loan forgiveness that way, we just don't think that's likely to happen. So really, to protect yourself, the best option at this point is to switch to a different kind of repayment plan. If in fact the SAVE plan is saved eventually, it's going to be a while this case moves its way through. You can always switch back to SAVE later, but for now it's better to get on an IDR plan. I will get to the question about how to submit in a minute. Go to the next slide. So there's 3 current SAVE repayment plan options that you can apply for. First of all is the regular standard payment plan. If you are on a standard payment plan on a non-consolidation loan, payments under that do count towards PSLF. But as Milo mentioned, if you're making the standard payment, you're going to pay it off in 10 years, which is the same as the loan forgiveness period. And so there's really no point to PSLF. This is really helpful for people who eventually get to a high enough income that they end up making the standard payment plan, even though they're still in public service loan forgiveness. So you're still covered even if your income goes higher. Really, the 3 that are now available are called an income-based repayment plan, a pay-as-you-earn plan, and an income contingent repayment plan. So the most favorable payment plan available is called an IBR plan. To qualify for this, you do have to show partial financial hardship, which basically means that you have to show that the payment you would have under an IBR plan would be less than the standard monthly payment over a period of 10 years. So they take a look at your annual adjusted gross income, which is basically your taxable earned income, and how much that exceeds 150% of the federal poverty level. So payments are basically either 10% of amounts you earn above the 150% of the federal poverty level for your family size, or 15%, depending on when you took out your loans. 10% is used for borrowers who had no outstanding balance on a federal loan as of July 1st, 2014, and who borrowed a loan on or after July 1, 2014. So it's a little confusing. That's how it's defined. If you are in a situation where you borrowed a loan prior to that date and had an outstanding balance as of July 1st, then you will have the 15% as your calculation. If your AGI is below 150% of the federal poverty level, then your payment will be zero. One thing I do want to mention that I didn't is your spouse's, if you're married and your spouse earns income, that income will be included if you file jointly your federal taxes. If you don't file jointly, then the department will only consider your income, not your spouse's. So just something to keep in mind when you are deciding how you're going to file taxes. This is the same as it was for a SAVE plan, so it really isn't any different. So that's, again, this is the one we recommend applying for if you are eligible, because it will give you the smallest payment of the most of the other options. In addition, the good thing about IBR is it isn't subject, none of the provisions in IBR are in the SAVE regulations. It's provided for by statute, so it's a safe plan to provide for. Okay, to apply for. Go ahead, sorry. The second plan is PAY. This is a little tricky. To be eligible, a borrower must not have had any outstanding balance on a direct or FFEL loan when they received a direct or FFEL loan on or after October 1, 2007, and they must have received a disbursement of a direct loan after October 1st, 2011. This is hard to figure out, but hopefully you can take a look at your loans and see if you fall into this category. For this group, payment is 10% of AGI you earn above 150% of the federal poverty level for your family size. Note that this is the same as the IBR plan for payments made for people who qualify for the 10%, meaning they had post July 1st, 2014 loans for the most part. So IBR, there's no point in applying for this if you in fact qualify for the 10% payment plan under IBR. Now note that this is ineligible for PSLF payments if it would be higher than the standard 10-year repayment plan. So if the calculation comes out to exceed the standard 10-year monthly repayment amount, then it won't count towards PSLF. The next slide. And finally, there's the income contingent repayment plan, which for the most part tends to be really expensive for most folks. This one doesn't have any hardship requirement, so anyone can apply regardless of their income level. In most cases, payment is calculated as 20% of your adjusted gross income above 100% of the federal poverty level for your family size. So you can see right off the bat, that's much higher than it would be under IBR. There is another payment formula for this. So if you have a really low balance, sometimes this can be more favorable because the alternative calculation looks at how much you would have to pay over a 12-year repayment plan. But for the most part, if you have a higher balance, really IBR is going to be your best bet. Note that the ICR plan is the only available option for people who had Parent Plus loans that they consolidated into direct consolidation loans. Parent Plus loans are not eligible for any kind of IDR plan. If a Parent Plus borrower wants to access an IDR plan, they have to consolidate into a direct consolidation loan, and then they can get access to the ICR plan. So just recently, there has been a lawsuit that filed by the American Federation of Teachers on behalf of their constituents, challenging some of the actions taken by the Trump administration on the PSLF plan. They challenged the removal of the IDR program. So they challenged when the department stopped processing all the IDR applications. The department has voluntarily restored all of those applications and the process for now, and it's agreed to file monthly status reports with the court, which is due May 15th. The first report is due, and you can look at that if you're interested to see how many applications have been received, how many are being processed. But right now, there isn't any decision in that case whether or not the department's actions stopping the processing of the IDR plans was illegal or not. So that's an ongoing case. Next slide. Some other sort of we wanted to mention some of the other issues that are at play currently with respect to public service loan forgiveness. One you may have heard of is the budget reconciliation bill, which is drafted, of course, by the Republicans, and it's proposed in the House of Representatives. We don't know if it will pass or not, and we don't know if it does pass what will happen in the Senate. But among other changes, the bill would eliminate both pay and save immediately, and it would make ICR and IBR unavailable to new borrowers starting in 2026. So this is something everyone should be aware of. Number two is that under this, it would propose a new income-based repayment assistance plan called IRAP, which would not provide any loan forgiveness, and it increases the amount that the income-driven repayment plan payments would be. The bill itself does not directly modify PSLF. So that's the good news, is PSLF isn't targeted in the budget reconciliation bill. The only thing that is currently being targeted are the income-driven repayment plans and the calculations for those. In addition, as I mentioned earlier, the department is proposing to hold a negotiated rulemaking to modify the regulations, including regulations on PSLF as well as on the IDR plans. The process right now is people will at some point be nominating negotiators to represent the different constituencies. Legal aid always has a seat at the table and will be, of course, raising issues and providing input on the public service loan forgiveness issues and the IDR issues. Right now, we don't know whether the department will include any other consumer-friendly seats. In the past, the Trump administration, the only consumer-friendly seat that it had on its negotiated rulemaking groups was like the legal aid seat. So we just don't know what's going to happen. So we suspect that will start this summer. And the negotiated rulemaking process has to play out, and then depending on what happens, then the department can propose regulations in writing. So it is a long process. It will take at least probably a year. I don't suspect that they will propose new regulations until November of 2026. That is when they have to propose new regulations for them to go into effect in July 1st of 2027. So as you can see, any modifications will take a long time for them to process and propose and become final. Next slide. Back to Milo.
Okay, so I'm just going to talk briefly about the whole interface for applying for public service loan forgiveness and tracking your progress. All of this information, all of these screenshots I'm going to show are available on studentaid.gov. So here is the PSLF payment tracker. This should show up on the dashboard page on studentaid.gov. So above is just the general loan information that will appear for everybody. For people working towards PSLF, there should also be this tracker here. So as you can see, PSLF progress is tracked towards each loan individually. So if you look at the screenshot, loan 1 has 30 qualifying payments, loans 2 and 3 have 20. Maybe loans 2 and 3 were taken out later. But this would mean, loan 1 would be forgiven earlier than loans 2 and 3. Here's another page on studentaid.gov. PSLF payments shows some more details. So it shows all these different statuses here, right? So qualifying payments, and then whether or not you have employer certification for each of them. So it can be a qualifying payment if it's on an IDR plan, but you would still need to certify qualifying employment. So you have to fulfill all of these criteria for each payment in order for it to count towards PSLF. And then it also shows an estimate for expected forgiveness date. And then if you go to the next tab over, payment history, you can see for each payment on each loan, whether it will count towards PSLF or not. And if it doesn't count right now, there should be a payment status, which will indicate the reason why it doesn't count. So as you can see here on the bottom of the page, a few of them are marked as qualifying. So that means it's all good. Those will count towards PSLF. And then some are marked as ineligible. So maybe, maybe no qualifying employment those months, or wrong payment plan or something. And then on the top, you see a few that are marked employment not certified. So those are payments that theoretically are qualifying for PSLF, but the borrower hasn't completed the process to get their employer certification form. So the PSLF help tool allows you to generate employer certification forms and send them to your employer. You need to provide an email address for an authorizing official at your workplace, and they'll receive this automated email from FSA. We advise that you do this at least annually. There's no rule that you can't go back later and certify older employment, but it's possible it'd be hard to track down your old employers, or that they wouldn't be willing to fill these out for whatever reason. So it's just good to keep on top of this. And so the authorizing official at your workplace just needs to confirm that the information being reported on the PSLF form is accurate, just that, you worked the requisite number of hours and that they're a eligible employer. So you can apply for PSLF once you reach 120 qualifying payments. So 120 months in which you were working for a qualifying employer and you made a qualifying payment, on one of the required payment plans. And your loans were qualifying. So after you've completed this requirement, you can apply either using a paper form. You can download a PDF from studentaid.gov's form library, and you can mail that or fax it to the Department of Education. Or the easier way to do it probably is to use the PSLF help tool. There's a link here, and then you can just apply for PSLF through studentaid.gov by logging in. And as I mentioned earlier, you do need to be in qualifying employment at the time the application is submitted, even if you hit 120 approved payments a long time ago. So after you apply for PSLF with the 120 qualifying payments, it's likely that it will take a while to be processed. The Department of Education recommends that you continue to make payments while this is processed. It's also possible to request a forbearance. If you do choose to continue making payments, the department is supposed to refund all of those extra payments after PSLF forgiveness is granted, but that might also take some time to be processed. Okay, so buybacks. So the status of buybacks isn't super clear, but I'm going to go through the procedure for PSLF buybacks quickly and talk about some recent updates. So PSLF buybacks are available for borrowers who still have some outstanding balance on their loans. They have months with approved qualifying employment. Those months are ineligible for PSLF due to a deferment or forbearance status that doesn't qualify. And buying back those months will complete the 120-month period of PSLF payments. So you have to meet all of these requirements in order for a PSLF buyback to actually be possible. So, for example, if you're at 110 months and then you have 5 months of of ineligible deferment status. You can't buy those back yet, right? You have to be at a point where buying back would let you hit 120. So the eligible months for buyback. So we mentioned earlier there's a few forms of forbearance that just count as qualifying payments. Those don't need to be bought back, right? Because they already count. But there are also categories of deferment and forbearance, which are not by default eligible for PSLF and don't count as a qualifying payment. So those are what will be eligible to buy back. So certain types of deferment and forbearance. And then there's also certain other periods that won't be eligible for buyback. So you can't buy back in school or grace periods. So like the 6-month period after you graduate. You can't buy back months where your loan was in default. You can't buy back months where your loan was in bankruptcy proceedings. And then you also can't buy back delinquent months, just general missed payments. So buybacks generally just for certain types of deferments and forbearances. So as of a month or two ago, the general consensus was that PSLF buybacks just weren't happening anymore. Recently, in the American Federation of Teachers case that Robyn was discussing, there was a declaration filed by the Department of Education, which did state that PSLF buybacks remained available and that there was a procedure for those and they were processing them. There were some other mistakes in that declaration, which they later corrected, so it's hard to be 100% sure if this is truly happening. And another question here is which periods of administrative or processing forbearances can be bought back. So if the buyback program is still operating right now, can people buy back save general forbearance months? That's still not entirely clear. The declaration didn't specify, and I haven't heard of anyone successfully buying back recently. So that's all still kind of up in the air. So the buyback amount is a little bit complicated. So if you're in the first category here, where you were on an IDR plan already immediately before or after the months you're buying back, and then you had a less than 1 year deferment or forbearance that's eligible to be bought back, then the payment amount would be the lower of the 2 monthly IDR payments. So there's an example here. So, let's say your IDR payment was $400 a month before, and then your income rose, so it was $450 a month. The buyback amount would be the lower of those two amounts multiplied by the number of months you're buying back. So if you don't fall into the above category, if you weren't on IDR, or if you had a longer period of deferment or forbearance, as people often do, the payment amount would be the lowest IDR amount you'd be eligible for at the time the deferment or forbearance started. So in this case, you'd be required to provide income documentation at that time so that the Department of Education can figure out what your IDR amount would be. And then it would just be that amount multiplied by the length of the time you're buying back. So the buyback process, in order to request a buyback, first make sure that you meet all the requirements. So the crucial thing is the buyback must get you to 120 months. If not, you won't be eligible for a buyback and it'll be rejected. In order to apply for buyback, if you qualify, you can use this link, the PSLF reconsideration page on studentaid.gov. And you're supposed to include verbatim this quote I provided about assessing your eligibility for PSLF buyback. And then here, same as applying for PSLF generally, you're supposed to continue making payments until the review is completed, until your buyback is approved. Again, the department should be giving a refund if you continue making payments. Okay, back to Robyn.
Hold on, I'm sorry. Answering a
Oh,
question.
right.
Okay, so somebody I'm talking with Dylan, who says he was put on forbearance in June and August, June and July before the I don't know why you were put on a forbearance, but you should be able to buy those back as well. Any time that you spent it in a qualifying forbearance would be eligible for a buyback. And I don't know what kind of forbearance that was either. You'd have to find out more information about that. Okay. So, and I just want to emphasize, we've been getting a lot of questions about the buybacks. Again, we don't know of a single person who's gotten a buyback, but you should definitely request one if you think you are eligible. The other thing to note, but at the same time, you should be applying for an IBR plan if you're eligible, or an IDR plan, just to make sure that if for some reason you can't do the buyback or it isn't properly implemented, you're still earning credits towards eventual public service loan forgiveness. So to protect yourself, I would do both. We again, also, I don't know if we know exactly what the buyback amount would be for those people that were on a SAVE plan, because SAVE was enjoined in August of 2024. So it might be that your buyback amount will be calculated, for example, as an IBR payment. So we don't know exactly what your payment amount will be, how it will be calculated. So what if you have problems, which of course a lot of people will have and have already had. Of course, the first level of inquiry is to call your loan servicer with your questions to ask, what is the status? When are you going to send me a refund check? When are you going to process my application? If you're not getting a satisfactory answer from the person you're talking to, because a lot of these people don't know what they're talking about, you can also escalate it and ask and talk to a supervisor. If you can't get the answer you want, or you think you should get, or a satisfactory answer at all, then you can submit a reconsideration request. So you submit that to request a buyback. You can submit that if you think they haven't properly calculated your IDR qualifying payments, or if they have said your employer is not a qualifying employer when in fact the employer is, or if you have any other kinds of disputes. That is the form that you should submit. The last thing you can do is to file a complaint and seek assistance from your congressperson. This is really important that people start doing this so that Congress knows what's going on, and they should have a staff person that can help you through this process. There is a really great toolkit on how to do this from the Student Borrower Protection Center, and it's available at this website, or you can just go to their website to find it. But again, please consider filing a complaint if you're having problems with your PSLF loan forgiveness, getting an IBR application processed, anything like that. Here's additional resources. What we went through today obviously was a huge amount of information. We will post the recording and the PowerPoint on LAAC's website. But in addition to this, there are some great places to find information. Obviously, studentaid.gov has some information. The PSLF tool guide, help tool guide, can also be very helpful. There is an IBR. Somebody earlier asked, how do I know what the different plans? What is my standard monthly payment plan? What would I have as IBR? You can use the IBR pay calculator at the EdCap New York website. Also, you can try the one on the Department of Education's website. It is now up and running. I don't know how accurate it is. Some people have noticed some weird calculations. So that's why we're also giving you the EdCap website, just in case. If you want updates on the SAVE lawsuit that was filed on behalf of the American Federation of Teachers, that is available also on the Student Loan Borrower Assistance website. And as far as updates on SAVE and the litigation going on challenging the SAVE regs, you can also see updates on the studentaid.gov website. And finally, again, Student Borrower Protection Center has great information on public service loan forgiveness and all of the stuff we went through today. So check out their website if you have any more questions. And we encourage you to submit complaints, not only to your congressperson, but if you're having problems with a servicer, to the California Department of Financial Protection and Innovation. They are charged with overseeing servicers in California. And if you're having problems with any particular servicer, please file a complaint so they know what's going on. And then also with the California Attorney General's office. You should also file one with the CFPB. You know, it's having issues right now with the Trump administration, but it still can be very important to let them know what's going on in the hopes that they will come back to life somehow or other. Now we can take any more questions that folks may have, and feel free to ask them in person if you want. Let's go. We have a few more questions. Are there class actions against Mohila? There are actually class actions against Mohila. The current one that we know of is for people who are eligible for automatic loan forgiveness because their school engaged in misconduct and the Department of Education determined that they were eligible for immediate debt relief who haven't gotten debt relief. I don't know of any others at this point, but I would say subscribe to the Student Borrower Protection Center's website, because if there are any such class actions filed, that's where they'll probably have something about that. In addition, important again to file complaints with the DFPI, because if you're seeing that they're calculating interest incorrectly, that's a really good resource to submit your complaints to. And then another question was, how likely is it that PSLF remain in place over the next few years? We don't know. Like I said earlier, right now it isn't targeted in the budget reconciliation process. And the statute, the Higher Education Act, would have to be amended to get rid of public service loan forgiveness. So it will depend, of course, on the composition of Congress in the future and who controls the House and the Senate. So you know, if it continues to be Republican controlled after the midterms, I think there's going to be a higher possibility that public service loan forgiveness will be modified or repealed. But there are, you know, the good news is that folks who have gotten loans while the law has been in effect should continue to be eligible for public service loan forgiveness, even if it is repealed, because there are good laws about when a benefit is repealed. The people who were relying on that benefit at the time they took out their loans should still be able to access it. But it obviously would be problematic for people who get loans after a repeal. But again, we just don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah, I'll also say some of the legislative proposals I've seen to get rid of PSLF have specifically said, you know, new borrowers will not have access. It will still keep it in place for people who borrowed before that. But yeah, very unclear what will happen.
Any other questions? Oh, good question. If we need assistance, who to reach out to? I am so glad whoever asked that question. Thank you. You can reach out to the Student Loan Empowerment Network. This is a network funded by the Legislature of California to provide free assistance to folks who have in California who have student loan questions. So I would reach out to them to see if maybe you can get help or answers to your question from there. And also, you know, reach out to your congressperson if you're having issues or questions, because that's their job, is to make sure the federal government's working for you. Could we break down the difference between IDR and pay? If you're in pay, you know, that's fine. You actually are getting you know, the best possible repayment plan, which is 10% of amounts above IBR, and you can stay in that plan. If for some reason pay ends up being, and while you're in pay, those those payments will count towards public service loan forgiveness. If pay eventually is struck down either through the Reconciliation Act or some other means, then you can always switch over to a different IDR plan at that time. So I wouldn't worry about the fact that you're in pay currently.
Question, does economic hardship forbearance count towards the 120 PSLF payments? I'm not sure.
Yes,
Robyn?
it does. The economic hardship deferment does, as long as you're still employed in a qualifying employment. If you're on an economic hardship deferment, my question is you should be on an IBR plan, because if the situation is that difficult, you should be hopefully eligible for a very low or $0 monthly payment. And then you can be certain that your IDR payments will be counted towards PSLF. But my understanding is that an economic hardship forbearance does count as long as you're in qualifying full-time employment.
Question about garnishment of wages for people in default.
Yes,
Yes, the
if you're in
government is
default on
doing that
federal
right now.
loans, the government can garnish wages, a portion of your wages. They can offset Social Security disability and Social Security retirement benefits. They can take federal income tax refunds. So if you know of anyone that's in default, you should definitely refer them to the Student Loan Empowerment Network for assistance. Because the Department of Education is stating that that's going to start happening very soon.
A question about when IDR applications will be processed. It seems kind of hit or miss. I've actually seen quite a few get processed in not too long for clients I'm working with, but other people have been waiting for a long time. I don't know if they're prioritizing single tax
No.
filers or married filers.
We don't know. You just have to submit it and hope they'll get to your application. And just remember, they should put you in a processing forbearance while you're waiting, during which time you have a $0 payment, and that's 2 months should count towards IDR loan forgiveness.
Does the repay plan count towards PSLF? So that's now save, and save does not count towards PSLF at this point because it's in general forbearance.
There is no more repayment plan, repay plan. Repay was replaced by save, and save is now enjoined. Any other questions that we've missed?
Is the forgiveness amount on PSLF taxable after 2020?
No. And we've had several questions. PSLF in the Higher Education Act is not taxable ever. So it's separate from the provisions that Congress passed for other kinds of loan forgiveness that can be taxable. So even if, which will end as of January 1st of 2026, but it doesn't end. Public service loan forgiveness is tax-free on the federal level. IDR forgiveness can be taxable. So like I said, other than PSLF, the other types of forgiveness can be taxable. If you obtain the loan discharge before the end of 2025, it will not be taxable. But after that date, Congress would have to act to make it not taxable. And there are some other reasons under tax law that you can argue that it shouldn't be taxable. And so if you have questions, it's really good to talk to a tax expert about your loan forgiveness if it's after January 1 of 2026 on something other than public service loan forgiveness. And yes, if you're married and you file separate federal income taxes, your spouse's income will not be considered in computing the IBR monthly payment amount or the income-driven repayment plan amount. Doesn't matter, if you're a community property state or, what kind of state you are in terms of how married property is treated. Any other questions? We still have 5 minutes.
So
I'm not sure I understand.
I think it's if you work for a 501(c)(3) for 10 years and then you start working for a different employer, you do need 10, I mean, sorry, not 10 years. If you
For
work
less
for
than
a
10 years.
501(c)(3) for, right, you do need 10 total years of work for a 501(c)(3) or government in order to be eligible.
But you can bank it, right? So if you work for 9 years at a legal aid and then you go to a for-profit employer for 5 years and then you come back to a nonprofit, those 9 years are still on your record. So then you would only need another year of PSLF payments to qualify for forgiveness. And one other thing, I know, yes, okay, this I was about to answer this question. So if someone has reached 120 PSLF qualifying payments, do they have to continue making payments and later hope for a refund? The answer is yes, because you don't want to go into default or have a delinquency reported on your credit report. If you miss 3 monthly payments, you will be reported as delinquent. If you miss 9 monthly payments, your loans will go into default. So it's better for you and your credit report to go ahead and continue making payments. You should at some point you will get a refund, or you should theoretically receive a refund of amounts that you overpay. But unfortunately, that's sort of the situation we're in. Any other questions? I don't see any more. Well, thank you so much. We hope this was helpful. And like I said, this all will be posted on LAAC's website, so you can watch it, you can look at the slides, and you can see all the links to the various other resources if you need them. And good luck to everyone. And hope you all can eventually get your public service loan forgiveness. And thank you for all the work you do on behalf of low income people.